Look, we need to have a real conversation today. The kind most people avoid because it's uncomfortable, because it challenges the narratives we've all been fed, because it risks sounding offensive in a world that worships comfort over clarity. But comfort never built a strong man. Truth does. And the truth about modern dating, especially when it comes to older women, is something a lot of men feel deep in their gut, but struggle to articulate without being labeled bitter or insecure. So let's cut through the noise. This isn't about attacking anyone. It's about understanding patterns. It's about looking at incentives, biology, psychology, and lived experience without flinching. Because if you're a man trying to build a life of impact, you cannot afford to ignore reality just because it makes people uncomfortable. When you date a woman in her late 30s or 40s, you're not just dating her, you're dating her history. And everyone has a past, sure, men do too. But the way emotional residue accumulates, the way it's stored, and the way it leaks into new relationships often looks very different. Every failed relationship leaves a mark. Every situationship that went nowhere. Every long-term ex who cheated. Every almost relationship that fizzled. These aren't just memories tucked neatly into a mental scrapbook. They become filters, defense systems, reflexes. By the time some women hit 40, they're not evaluating you purely on your actions. They're evaluating you through the lens of every man who disappointed them before you arrived. You don't text back in 20 minutes, and suddenly you're on trial for the crimes of a guy from 2018 who used silence as manipulation. You question something lightly, and it triggers a defensive spiral rooted in a betrayal that happened a decade ago. It's not about you, but you're the one dealing with the fallout. I've seen it countless times. A solid guy enters the picture. He's stable, present, communicative. And yet he's treated like a suspect because she built emotional armor instead of healing the wound underneath. She says she's done the work. She says she's been in therapy for years. And therapy can be powerful, absolutely. But for some, it becomes a place to rehearse grievances instead of resolve them. A place to validate their narrative without confronting their patterns. There's a difference between processing pain and preserving it. Many men, when faced with their own failures, go to war with themselves. They hit the gym. They take on physical hardship. They build businesses. They confront their weaknesses through action. It's imperfect, sometimes messy, but it's forward motion. Action has a way of forcing self-honesty. But some women carry tokens of past pain like protective charms. One of the most potent versions of this is what's often called the alpha widow dynamic. That one man who stirred something intense, high status, emotionally unavailable, magnetic. The one who didn't commit. The one who moved her in a way no one else quite did. He didn't choose her, but he imprinted. Years later, she may be with a stable, dependable man. A good man. But somewhere in the quiet corners of her mind, that ghost still lingers. If that old flame resurfaced with a renewed offer, would she hesitate? Maybe. Maybe not. But the possibility alone shapes her expectations of you. When you date younger, the emotional archive is shorter. When you date older, you often walk into a crowded room. And if you're not aware of that, you'll internalize reactions that were never about you in the first place. Then there's the shift in power dynamics that few people want to acknowledge. For thousands of years, mate selection followed certain biological incentives. Women, bearing the heavier reproductive cost, selected for security and competence. A man who couldn't provide stability wasn't just unattractive. He was dangerous to her survival and that of her offspring. Hypergamy wasn't a social conspiracy. It was evolutionary strategy. Men, on the other hand, selected for cues of fertility and health. Youth and beauty weren't superficial preferences. They were biological indicators of reproductive viability. Modern society can layer slogans over this reality, but slogans don't override wiring. This is where aging creates asymmetry. A man in his 40s who spent his 20s and 30s building career, physique, competence, often becomes more attractive over time. His value compounds. Experience sharpens him. Resources increase. Confidence stabilizes. He becomes a finished product rather than a work in progress. A woman's primary dating leverage, historically anchored in youth and beauty, follows a different curve. That doesn't mean she loses all value. Far from it. Wisdom, emotional depth, shared goals, these matter deeply. But if we're being honest, the peak of raw sexual market value often arrives earlier for women than for men. You see this play out in real life. The guy who was overlooked at 22 because he wasn't flashy enough builds something meaningful by 42. Suddenly, attention shifts. But the women who now show interest aren't the same vibrant 22-year-olds. They're peers who have also accumulated years, sometimes gracefully, sometimes with visible strain. And this is where the illusion game begins. Spanx, strategic lighting, carefully angled profile photos, cosmetic procedures. There's nothing inherently wrong with wanting to look your best. Self-care is admirable, but there's a line between maintenance and reconstruction. When enhancement becomes camouflage, you're no longer presenting yourself, you're presenting a temporary simulation. The tight shapewear that creates an hourglass illusion disappears at the end of the night. The fillers that promise youth can distort natural expression. Botox freezes not just wrinkles, but sometimes the subtle emotional cues that make someone feel alive and authentic. It's worth asking why so many feel compelled to go that route. Because underneath it is fear. Fear of irrelevance. Fear of being replaced by someone younger. Fear that the marketplace no longer favors them the way it once did. And fear can drive people toward shortcuts. But shortcuts tell you something about problem-solving style. If someone responds to aging, a universal human experience, primarily with concealment instead of discipline, what does that suggest about how they handle conflict? Stress? Accountability? The body doesn't lie forever. Neither do patterns, and no amount of cosmetic intervention can address the one reality that sits quietly beneath all of this. Fertility. For some men, this is irrelevant. They've had children, or they don't want them. But for many men in their 30s and 40s, the desire for legacy is strong. The desire to pass on genes, values, a name. Biology is indifferent to empowerment narratives. Female fertility declines gradually in the early 30s and then more sharply after 35. By the early 40s, natural conception becomes significantly more difficult, and risks increase. This isn't moral judgment, it's physiology. Yet you'll see dating profiles of women in their early to mid-40s expressing openness to starting a family. And technically, it's possible. Medicine has extended options through IVF and hormone treatments. But possible does not mean probable, and it certainly doesn't mean low risk. Men notice this, even if they don't say it aloud on the first date. They calculate quietly. If starting a family is important, the biological clock becomes a strategic factor. There's a deeper tragedy here. Many women were told throughout their 20s and 30s that prioritizing career, travel, exploration, and self-discovery carried no trade-offs, that they could postpone motherhood indefinitely without consequence, that the window was elastic. It isn't. One client of mine, a successful man in his late 40s, fell deeply for a brilliant 42-year-old executive. They were aligned intellectually, emotionally compatible. The connection was real. But when the topic of children emerged, urgency replaced ease. IVF cycles, hormone injections, financial strain, emotional whiplash. 2 years of hope and heartbreak followed. The relationship didn't collapse because they lacked chemistry. It collapsed under the weight of biology and timing. He realized he had entered a high-stakes medical battle that could have been avoided with different alignment. She realized she had delayed a priority too long. No villains, just consequences. As a man, you have to decide what your long-term vision is. Companionship without children, a family, adventure, stability. Once you know that, clarity becomes non-negotiable. Dating in your 40s demands ruthless honesty, with yourself first. You must see the emotional baggage for what it is, not what you hope it will transform into. You must recognize enhancement tactics for what they are, not what filtered photos promise. You must factor biology into your decisions without shame or apology. None of this means older women are unworthy of love. Many are extraordinary, disciplined, self-aware, vibrant. But alignment matters more than attraction. Timing matters more than chemistry. If you've worked relentlessly to build yourself into a man of value, physically, financially, mentally, don't ignore mismatches out of loneliness or politeness. Protect your future. Protect your legacy, whatever that means to you. The marketplace is not cruel, it's indifferent. It rewards preparation and punishes denial. So look at the facts, not the fantasies, not the slogans. The facts. Because the man who sees clearly moves confidently. And the man who moves confidently chooses intentionally. That's how you navigate the modern dating landscape without losing yourself in it. There's another layer to this conversation that most men only start to understand after they've been out there long enough to see the patterns repeat. It's not just about emotional residue or physical decline, it's about incentives. It's about how time reshapes leverage. When a woman is in her early 20s, she doesn't have to negotiate much. Attention flows toward her automatically. Invitations, compliments, options. Even average-looking young women experience a level of validation that most men will never taste at any point in their lives. That validation becomes the baseline. It becomes normal. Now fast forward 20 years. The same woman is 42. The volume of attention has shifted. The men approaching her are not the same tier she remembers from her peak years. The high-status, charismatic guy she once turned down because she had 3 other similar options, he's now dating someone 27. The marketplace changed, and it didn't ask for her permission. That's where resentment can creep in. You'll hear phrases like, "Where have all the good men gone?" But often what's meant is, "Where have all the men who once chased me gone?" The definition of good quietly narrows to a memory of past leverage. And this is where you, as a man in your 40s who has built something real, must stay alert. Because you are no longer the underdog trying to prove your worth. You are the asset. Your time, your stability, your emotional bandwidth. Those are valuable commodities. If you're not careful, you can step into a dynamic where you're being selected, not for who you are, but for what you represent. Safety, retirement plan, emotional rehab center. This shows up subtly. She talks about how tired she is of games, how she's ready for something real. On the surface, that sounds mature. But sometimes it translates to, she's exhausted from chasing men who didn't commit, and now she wants someone predictable who won't disrupt her emotional equilibrium. There's nothing wrong with wanting stability, but you have to ask yourself, does she desire you, or does she require you? Desire is fire. It's voluntary. It's enthusiastic. Requirement is strategic. It's practical. It's about plugging a gap. A lot of men confuse gratitude with attraction. A woman may appreciate your reliability, your patience, your willingness to listen. But appreciation alone doesn't build passion. And without passion, relationships slowly turn transactional. You become the responsible one, the planner, the fixer, the man who absorbs the stress she accumulated over decades of chaotic romantic decisions. And let's talk about that chaos for a second. In their 20s and early 30s, many women prioritize excitement. the charismatic risk-taker, the emotionally intense roller coaster, the guy who makes her feel something unpredictable. Stability is often labeled boring at that stage, but by 40, unpredictability becomes exhausting. So now stability is rebranded as attractive. The issue isn't that preferences evolve. Of course they do. The issue is when the same man who would have been invisible at 25 is now expected to enthusiastically accept a role that feels like a consolation prize. Men sense this. Even if they can't articulate it, they feel it. They feel when they're being compared to ghosts. They feel when enthusiasm is forced. They feel when physical intimacy carries more obligation than hunger. And here's something that rarely gets said out loud. Resentment doesn't disappear with age. It calcifies. If a woman feels that life didn't deliver the fairy tale she expected, if the high-status man didn't commit, if motherhood didn't happen on schedule, if career success feels hollow, those unmet expectations can harden into subtle bitterness. You'll notice it in small comments. Cynicism about men, jokes that carry sharp edges, a constant testing of your loyalty, an almost reflexive skepticism of your intentions. That's not wisdom. That's scar tissue. And scar tissue is protective. It reduces vulnerability, but it also reduces sensation. If you are a man entering that dynamic full of optimism, wanting to build something meaningful, you may find yourself pushing against emotional armor that never fully comes off. Then there's the independence narrative. You'll often hear, "I don't need a man." Financial independence, career stability, a house she bought herself. Again, none of this is bad. Strength is admirable. But relationships are not built on needlessness. And they're built on mutual desire and complementary value. If the underlying posture is hyper-independence, you may struggle to find your role. In many cases, hyper-independence developed as a response to disappointment. If I can't rely on men, I'll rely on myself. Over time, that mindset becomes identity, and identity is hard to soften. You might find yourself competing not with other men, but with her routines, her established lifestyle, her rigid boundaries shaped by past hurt. Contrast that with a younger woman who is still forming her identity. She may be less financially established, yes, less experienced, but she is also more adaptable, more open to building something jointly rather than fitting you into a pre-constructed life. That adaptability matters. Now, let's be clear. Youth alone does not guarantee peace. Younger women bring their own challenges: immaturity, lack of direction, emotional volatility. There is no perfect demographic. There are only trade-offs. The key is recognizing which trade-offs align with your long-term vision. If you're a 43-year-old man who wants a calm, low-drama companionship without children, a self-sufficient woman in her 40s who has done real inner work could be a fantastic match. But that real inner work is the differentiator. Not therapy attendance, not Instagram quotes. Actual self-reflection, ownership, accountability. Without that, you risk stepping into a dynamic where you are managing decades of unresolved patterns. And here's something men must internalize: your peak years are valuable. If you've spent 20 years building discipline, waking up early, grinding through career challenges, maintaining your physique when it would have been easier to let it slide, you have earned optionality. Optionality means you do not have to accept misalignment out of fear. Fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear of judgment. Because here's the irony. The same society that told women they could delay everything without consequence also tells men they're selfish for exercising choice once they finally have leverage. You'll be called shallow for preferring youth. You'll be accused of insecurity for wanting a partner without heavy emotional baggage. But nobody was calling women shallow when they filtered for height, income, confidence, and status at 25. Preferences are only condemned when they disadvantage someone who used to benefit from them. That doesn't mean you act cruelly. It means you act consciously. You evaluate compatibility across emotional health, physical attraction, life goals, and timing. You refuse to sign up for roles you didn't audition for. Because the next layer of this conversation, where biology becomes unavoidable, raises stakes even higher. And when legacy enters the equation, clarity stops being optional.